The West Puget Community Connection Podcast. This is where we learn about the people of our community. We learn what they do, and more importantly, why they do it. Subscribe by email at westpugetcommunityconnection.com. We look forward to learning more about you. The West Puget Community Connection Podcast is brought to you in part by mywebdesignservices.com. Quick, easy, affordable websites that look amazing across all devices. For a quote or to get started today, visit mywebdesignservices.com. Welcome to the West Puget Community Connection Podcast, where we learn about the people in our community, what they do, and more importantly, why they do it. Our mission is to stimulate community engagement by creating a sense of community and rapport. We do that through interviews and storytelling with locals. You can listen to the podcast for free with unlimited streaming on our homepage at westpugetcommunityconnection.com. Contact us if you're interested in advertising or being featured on the show. And now, without further ado, we bring you this episode of the West Puget Community Connection Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the West Puget Community Connection Podcast. This is your host, Vincent Alexander. And today we welcome Cynthia Osterman. Cynthia Osterman has an organization called the Benji Project here in Port Townsend. She's going to share some information about what that is. And hello, Cynthia. Are you there? Let's go ahead and introduce you.
Yeah, hey. Hi, nice to be with you today.
Thank you very much for joining us. Let's see. I think this came about in middle of June. I reached out to you. I saw a flyer for the Benji Project, and I got really curious and really interested and reached out to you. And then we met for coffee, and that was, in late June. And so here we are, August, and I'm really excited to be doing this call with you. I have listened to your other podcast, which was called Mindfulness Matters. You were featured on a podcast called Mindfulness Matters, and I Googled that and got lots of information about you and the Benji Project there.
Great.
So I have some background information and some notes I've taken here. So let's get to know you a bit, Cynthia. First of all, I don't know, how long have you lived in the Port Townsend area, and how did you get here?
I moved here in let me think. It was, spring of 2000. So just coming up past 19 years. We moved into our house in fall 2000. We lived for a little bit while our house was being built out in Gardner, but I've been in the area for about 19 years. Moved most immediately from the Washington, D.C. area. My career has been in journalism, and I was working there as an editor. I've worked for the same media company throughout my career, and I got to know this part of the world when previously I was based in Vancouver, Canada, and with my husband, spent a lot of weekends exploring this part of the world, and because I'd been living overseas, I had a desire to kind of have a place to call home, and in the mid-90s bought a little piece of property here and continued to move around, and finally we made our plan to move here permanently and got here in 2000.
Okay. I see. Okay, so your background is 30 years as a reporter and an editor for a media company. And so that took you around the world, I hear. I have some notes here. It says Chicago, London, Amsterdam, Paris, Vancouver. Sounds like you were based out of there for a while. East Africa. and then you came here to PT in 2000. So 19 years ago.
I've been working remotely since then. Earlier in my career, I was a reporter and writer, and I still use a lot of those skills, but now I'm an editor, and it's really fabulous to be able to live in our community and, do a job that I love so much and I find so interesting. And, normally in another era, you would have to be, living in a big city to participate in a career, at that level. But it's been great, and I've just grown more and more attached to Port Townsend over the years and decades I've been here.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I can relate to your love for Port Townsend. Yeah, a lot of people discover it and fall in love with it here. So, in 1995, you took a 10-day course, and that was in mindfulness or meditation. Is that something like that? This was kind of like was an introduction for you to something profound?
I've been a Vipassana meditator since 1995, and I know a lot of people in Port Townsend in this area have done those courses. There's a center down between Seattle and Portland off the I-5, kind of in the Chehalis area, and there's many other centers around the world. It's a meditation technique that is based on, sorry, my dog is barking. Can you hear that?
That's okay.
Yeah, okay, sorry. Where was I? So, yes. And so Vipassana meditation was really transformational for me. It's based on the teachings of the Buddha about present moment awareness and equanimity. So I've continued to practice and attend 10-day silent retreats pretty much every year. There were some years in there where I did not, but that is my main practice, and it's been it's been a lifesaver and a life enhancer in so many ways. I don't know how much you want to go into it, but it's essentially the mindfulness practice, and I think it's we hear so much about mindfulness these days, and there's a lot of different flavors of it, and they're all great, and I think people can get a lot of benefit from it, and certainly it has been really helpful in my life.
Would you like to summarize for us what you mean by mindfulness, or what that is? Maybe even to pique people's interest in it.
Yeah, so I think one of the best definitions comes from John Kabat-Zinn, who is he was at the University of Massachusetts Medical School, I think, and he's sort of the in the West one of the primary people to popularize mindfulness as sort of a stress reduction technique, and really brought it into mainstream medicine. And his definition is paying attention on purpose to the present moment without judgment. So really it's about trying to be aware of everything that's going on and in this very moment, not in the what happened to you 15 minutes ago, or not what you're going to have for lunch in a half an hour, but really what's going on in this very moment. And instead of either pushing against, resisting, or clinging to whatever that present moment experience is, sometimes you're frustrated or irritated, and instead of trying to push that away, or similarly you may be in a moment that's really pleasant, and you want to hang on to it and try to make it last forever. Instead of doing either of those things, you try to just observe it and accept the reality of what's going on without reacting to it. And so that whole practice is in a way, sort of retraining your brain and kind of building mental muscles, if you will, because so much of our suffering in life comes from feeling that things shouldn't be the way they are. So instead of getting wrapped up in our stories about, how this thing shouldn't be happening to me or it should have gone a different way, you can become more effective. You can be more present in the moment and non-reactive instead of, if somebody makes a comment to you and you have a story going on in your head that, when somebody, somebody said something that you don't like, that they think you're a terrible person and you react a certain way because of that. You're sort of creating a chain of events. You're kind of causing your life to go in a certain direction and your interactions with other people. But if you can kind of train yourself through this practice to not be reactive, you open up the opportunity to experience what's really going on and maybe really hearing the message of the other person, which is maybe they didn't have that that thought in the back of their mind, and maybe it was just an innocent question, or maybe that person is having a really hard day, and if you're really wrapped up in your own story, you aren't able to perceive all that. And so it can equally be joy and life affirming, because on a beautiful day, instead of, as it's so easy to do, being wrapped up in your email and all that, if you can actually stop and breathe and look at the sky and see the sun, maybe for a minute you take yourself out of that that cycle of thoughts that can be so draining. So, it's a lifelong project. It's there's no actually getting there. You just continue to practice it, and even just the little bit that you practice starts to change the way you experience your everyday moments, and I found it to be really beneficial.
Wow, okay. That was really fun to hear you talking about mindfulness and what it is, and it sounds very familiar to me. To me, it reminds me of what I'm practicing, what I've read in the Nonviolent Communication book, and where Rosenberg talks about the first step of the process is to observe without evaluating. So he's talking about noticing events that are taking place in your environment, noticing what feelings are coming up, noticing what thoughts might pass through your mind, noticing what you might be telling yourself or what someone else might be saying, but without evaluating it at all, without judging it, without analyzing it, without making abstractions or jumping to conclusions, but just to see it and just to notice that it's happening.
Yeah, I think that captures it really well. I think there's there's a lot of practices that kind of some truths are universal, and so you can see dimensions of the same teachings and the same ideas reflected in a lot of different traditions, and some of these things have a lot in common. And I think that when you start to see those commonalities, you realize that there is something really valuable there, because so many people have arrived at the same conclusions. So, a lot of these ideas came from the Buddha, who, 2,500 years ago really, achieved an enlightenment that for me is so far out of reach, but I'm so grateful that his ideas were recorded and have been passed down, and it's just beautiful to see. I think that nonviolent communication, mindfulness, there's a lot of practices, yoga, there's some pretty ancient wisdom in all of these things, and I think the way they converge, it's more about what speaks to you and how you're able to put that into practice in your life. They all have a lot to offer.
Yes. Yeah. It's really neat for me to see, like you said, ancient wisdom sort of reappearing over here in this community, over here in this community, and maybe it's being delivered as a different, with a different label or something, but we're sort of, we're coming back to these same just principles of nature and human nature that we're finding consistently helpful. The observation without evaluation concept changed my life. It was really, I think there's something very, very profound about that practice. I know there is personally, because when I became aware of that concept and that principle, and I started to notice, it was all of a sudden I was able to not be in my head, up in my head. I would notice when I was doing it, and I would realize the difference between what I was observing and then me being actually caught up in my head. And being able to notice the two, it's like I stepped into a whole nother world where after a while my brain learned that it didn't even really need to do that anymore. I could just relax. I found myself in a lot more peace and a lot more calm, and just not up in my head and experiencing so much conflict, and I wasn't judging myself so much. And that's what made the big difference, I think, for me, was not judging myself so much and not even passing judgment on the world as much anymore. And it was really like stepping out of sort of a hell that I had been living in into a much more peaceful place. So I think there's something extremely profound to that concept of mindfulness, of observation without judgment, and just seeing the difference between observations and your judgments, just being aware of the two.
Yeah, and I've also noticed that, when you do that, it becomes possible for you to be much more of a problem solver and an actor. I think, just seeing something for what it is, accepting that things are the way they are, instead of getting lost in a loop of, it shouldn't be, or I wish it were this other way, you're ready to start from a place of here's what I'm facing. And acknowledging, like, this is really hard. This is, I am not enjoying this. This is, whatever it might be. Or maybe, I'm loving this, I wish it would never stop. And then recognizing that those are all, kind of attachments and aversions that our mind is trained to think that it's in charge, and we've spent our whole life reacting to outside stimulus, things we see, things we feel, things we hear, things we taste, and that whole dynamic of stimulus on the outside producing a craving or aversion on the inside is sort of the source of our suffering. And if we can stop that judgment loop, so much more peace and harmony and right-minded action are possible. When we respond to others, when we're in that non-judgment space, we can respond with our best self, with love, with compassion, with maybe strength is required. Maybe we have to be strongly oppositional to do what's right, but we're not doing it out of anger or aggression or hatred. We're doing it for the right reason.
Wow, you're really hitting the nail on the head for me over here as I'm listening to what you're saying about being a problem solver, an actor. You said respond. Respond was a word that came up a few more times. And so, yes, to get out of what you said there, the judgment loop. I like that term too, because it's like if you don't notice the difference between your judgments or what I'd say sort of like your imaginary evaluations or your abstractions, your opinions, your beliefs, or your perspective, your perception of the situation, where you're mixing in your own thinking. If you don't notice the difference between that and what you're actually observing, that can be very confusing. And you can get caught up in this loop of reacting to what's going on up in your head rather than being able to respond to reality effectively. So I too personally have had the experience where once I started to notice the difference, started to pay attention to the difference between observation and these evaluations in my mind, then suddenly I was in a position where I was able to respond more effectively and actually create results that I wanted, to eliminate certain conflicts and get certain unmet needs dealt with, get the needs met actually, rather than just being like that, you said, that judgment loop and just existing in sort of a state of conflict. And it's really kind of almost ironic to me, because a lot of times in this community I hear people saying, well, it's not about fixing things, it's not about problem solving and fixing things, it's about something else, it's about empathy or something like that. But I personally, my experience and what I've heard from everyone else who practices this is that it does create it enables responsibility. It helps us respond to things in a much more, I guess someone might say, a more resourceful way.
I think part of it is that I think when you're working on taking out that reactive piece, the reactive piece is very closely associated with the ego, and a lot of us have gone through life and are still going through life with these ideas about ourselves, and we are kind of guarding these internal little statues of ourselves, of the people who we think we are, whether it's pain and loss from childhood or other experiences, or we feel we're superior to others, or whatever it might be. And so a lot of our actions and attitudes are directed towards polishing that inner image and shoring up our beliefs about ourselves. But really, it's not about us at all. We're what we're trying to do as fellow humans is come together and solve problems, make the world a better place, and having excessive attachment to those stories about ourselves just kind of stands in the way of that. So if you are able to, and what I find, and as I said, it's a work in progress. I'm every day, see 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It is not an easy path by any means, but I think just by practicing the technique, you don't even have to be, you just sort of become a little by little a person who lives that way. Or more often you're that way than not. It's maybe if you flew off the handle, 15 times a day, maybe if you practice diligently and you meditate, maybe a year later you're going to only fly off the handle 12 times a day. So, that's a little bit of progress. And so without even addressing, it's kind of counterproductive to say, I'm not going to fly off the handle. I'm not going to be mean. I'm not going to, it's, so when I talked about kind of retraining the brain, and that's what I mean, that it's very hard to consciously direct ourselves to, not make mistakes, because we always fall back into these habitual patterns. But if we work on changing our nature, and start living in line with the realities that about what's true and what's real, we start to change, and all of a sudden we find it easier for ourselves to get along with others, or to listen empathetically, or we notice things that we didn't used to notice, and so it doesn't have to be it's not a conscious, like I'm on this 60-day plan that I'm not gonna lose my temper anymore. It's much more subtle than that, and I think the benefits flow whether you're trying to specifically target a certain action or not.
Okay. So that is something that I've heard from these communities is don't expect, for this to make you perfect or for you to be good at it overnight or anytime soon. It's like maybe each day you get a little less terrible at doing it because it's such a challenging thing to do, and maybe over time maybe it will get easier for you to do, and you'll be a little easier for you to do. And I also heard you say don't judge yourself for being bad at it in the beginning.
Yeah, and I think a big thing is that once you start looking at the world in this way, you just naturally become way more humble, and I think that humility brings a lot of progress all on its own. It's you start to question all your beliefs about what you think should be and how you feel people should treat you, and
Wow.
and realize that it's a lot of self-created myths going on.
It's very humbling. Gosh, what you're saying just resonates with me so much in the experience that I've had. It's very humbling, yes, now that suddenly you realize, wow, all these abstractions I had about people and these labels I slapped on certain people, come to find out I wasn't observing the whole reality. I wasn't able to see the whole reality because I was too busy looking at what the image I was drawing in my mind, not noticing the difference. And as you practice this, there's a humbleness that comes with it where it's like, I can't assume anymore. I can't assume that I already know. I should stay in that position of curiosity and wondering, and notice more and more, and be more connected to the reality. And it's really humbling. And then there's something else you said about the ego. I think maybe, so the ego, there's another thing, is just to notice that, like, the way, what you think about the way that you think about yourself, the character that you imagine in your mind of who you are, or how you project yourself to others, there's a difference between that and what you really are. In other words, I like how Shakespeare said it, the world's a stage and we're all players. And so we're all wearing masks out in the world. When we go out into the world and we take action on a day-to-day basis, we put on clothes, we speak with whatever vocal tone we choose to speak with, and that's all part of us just taking action throughout the day and sort of putting on a persona and acting. And there's a difference between that and what we really are. And so again, that's kind of mindful. It's like observational. Like I'm not so attached anymore to my image or the image of who I think I am or how I project myself to others. I'm not so attached to that anymore. Just like I'm not really as attached anymore to my opinions or labels that I was so quick to slap onto people in the past. So there's definitely a sort of humbleness that comes along with this, and everything you're saying about it really resonates a lot with me. Would you like to tell us about your project, the Benji Project?
Yeah, so the Benji Project was inspired by the death of my son, Benji Kenworthy. He died in 2015 at age 15 by suicide. And just a little detour to say that part of what I love about this community is the fact that it's a community, and I really felt and saw that when my son died. I felt so supported, and I felt not judged, and I felt cared for. And I had always loved Port Townsend, but my love has really doubled and quadrupled and quintupled since then. That experience was, of course, the worst, most horrific experience that any parent could go through. Benji was a really beautiful and unusual person, and we did not see that coming. And I went through a long period of suffering. I, of course, still, I'll never stop grieving for him. But I sort of went on this inquiry, a journey of detective work into my own life to try to understand, how I could have missed what surely must have been signs that were there. I did a lot of learning, learned that teenagers, especially teenage boys, are highly impulsive because of what the brain is doing at that time. The reactive part of the brain is really, the reactive, impulsive, risk-taking part of the brain is growing a lot then as part of, biology's way of preparing young people to have the wherewithal to leave the nest and to take risks, while the reasoning, executive function, the judgment part of the brain doesn't develop fully until the mid-20s. So I think part of it was, he was having a bad day and made a impulsive decision, and maybe on another day it would have gone a different way. But I got really lost for a year or two there in one of those stories that we were talking about, that it was my fault. I had failed him, that the world judged me as a bad mother, and I really wanted to do something about, I imagined him suffering and in despair, and tried to understand why he had not reached out for help. I think that boy was so loved. We cherished him, and I think he knew that. But for some reason, he was not able to ask for help, and I started to try to tease out why that would be. And he was always a really sensitive kid, and I think he really had put up walls to protect himself and hid, he projected this image. He wanted the world to see someone who had things figured out, and on the inside he didn't feel that way, and he wasn't able to put down the mask. You talked about how we go out in the world with masks, and I think he had learned that putting up that image was a way of protecting himself, but it became so predominant for him that he was not able to put down the mask and show his vulnerability. And one of the things that I hadn't fully taken on board was, he was in a generation, as kids are now, really shaped by social media that was not, it didn't even exist when I was a teenager. So I really wasn't aware of how kids are. I was aware, but not to the extent, that I think I needed to be, of how kids are shaped by this constant stream of images of, everybody's excellent and perfect and achieving, and their lives are great, and everybody has, the perfect relationship, and, and that's what's on social media. And as a 15-year-old, they don't, or, a teenager of any age, they don't have that life experience to know that, no life is without suffering. Everybody has, it's just part of life. Bad things happen to everybody. Failing a test, getting in an argument with someone, but all of that gets kind of swept under the rug on social media, and so I think it skews the expectations of kids who don't have that life experience to ground it a little bit. So I knew I really wanted to do something in Benji's memory, a way to affect that suffering and despair that I know he experienced, change that situation for other kids. And I started doing research, and I had learned about mindful self-compassion, which is really taking off in the well-being and mental health world. Someone at what's now Discovery Behavioral Health told me about the research that was going on, And I started exploring that, and not only did it become the impetus for this project, but it was so incredibly healing for me. Mindful self-compassion combines the mindfulness that we talked about with self-compassion, which is, we loosely talk about it as treating yourself like you would treat a good friend. And, I talked about the self-judgment I had about, being the parent of a child who died by suicide and how I felt that I had failed him, and, all of the judgments that I heaped on myself. Mindful self-compassion teaches you to cut yourself a break and to acknowledge that you're doing the best you can. And I did do the best I can, and I knew that, but I still blame myself. And so exploring that practice became very healing for me, and that is the seed of the Benji Project. The primary researchers in mindful self-compassion are Kristen Neff and Chris Germer, and they developed a very successful, highly effective class for adults. It's an 8-week class that you can learn more about at the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion. I think the website is cmsc.org. And then 2 other researchers adapted that course into a course for adolescents, and that's what the Benji Project offers. Our mission is to offer well-being, stress management, and emotional resilience skills training to teens ages 11 to 19, and that class is the centerpiece of what we do.
Okay. Wow, this is just, I'm loving this call. I'm loving everything you're saying, everything you're sharing.
Oh, good.
So the Benji Project is providing emotional resilience training for teens age 11 to 17. And
19.
And those classes, 11 and 19. And those classes and workshops take place here in Port Townsend, is that right?
Right, and we are looking to expand throughout Jefferson County.
Great. And so when you say self-compassion, I just wanted to spend a moment there with you on that concept. And I like the way you said it's like treating yourself the way you would treat a good friend. And I often find myself using the words, don't be so hard on yourself. And then I say that to myself too. Don't be so hard on yourself. Don't be such a critic. And it's kind of like forgiveness. It's like forgiving myself or accepting myself as I am, and forgiving others and accepting them as they are. Human, doing the best they can.
Exactly. And one of the great things, it combines that mindfulness piece too, where instead of trying to push away, those thoughts, you kind of lean into them and you acknowledge that what you're facing is really hard, and give yourself the care. I think a lot of us feel that we need, there's something self-indulgent about taking care of ourselves, and that, making excuses is, to say something like, oh, you did the best you could, is like making an excuse or rationalizing. But the reality is that when we go down that path of negativity, we just get, we pile on ourselves the way we would never do to anyone else, and then we get lost. We just feel like we're a failure. We're never going to get any better. I'm never going to pass that class, or I'm always going to make that mistake. And then we become ineffective, and we become depressed. And there's no progress there. If we could be our own best friends, we would be so much more effective, because we would be able to take ourselves out of that loop, the judgment loop, and start, if you weren't kind of distraught and upset about failing that test and what a bad person you are and I'm so dumb, or, whatever's going on, you could say, okay, well, now I can, after a while I could take a walk, clear my head. What could I do to do better on tomorrow's test, And so all of a sudden you have an opportunity to start again and have a fresh start and lift that weight off your shoulders. And for me, there's no way I can really go on and do better, and carrying that giant millstone on my back.
So I heard you say if we could be our own best friends, if we could be like our own best friends, in other words, sort of sit at our own side and sort of give ourselves forgiveness, acceptance, rather than being caught up in that critic role, rather than putting more and more weight on more and more burden of shame, rather than living in that place that we need to keep quiet and hide from everyone so they don't see it because it's not good enough, rather than keeping that facade going, just sort of be like, well, I'm human and I am what I am and I'm doing my best, and I can let that all down. I can let people see me for who I really am if I can do that for myself first. Is any of that resonating?
Yeah, totally. I think that one of the things about the Benji Project is that challenge and adversity are just part of life. And I think when I talked about how kids are often given the impression these days that normal is that everything should be good. But, those of us who've reached adulthood know that, ups and downs are what's normal. Yeah, there'll be good times, but there's going to be bad times. And so, it's just makes really good common sense to know how to take care of yourself. And, that doesn't need a boyfriend or someone else, a girlfriend to make you feel good about yourself. You can become skillful at learning how to take care of yourself. And one of the things that we see in our classes at the Benji Project is that, some kids may not have strong support at home, or they're, have difficult circumstances in their lives. And I think it's really refreshing and a huge relief for them to know that they can still go on and be okay. It's not, I think we often, we know that some people start life with challenging circumstances and deficits that we wish weren't there. But if kids have the skills to take care of some of their needs, of course, everybody has needs that, parents and others need to supply, but if they can start taking a little bit better care of their emotional well-being on their own, that's a great life skill that will help them weather all those ups and downs. And, I think there's often this belief that, starting life in adversity and challenge, you're just kind of doomed to more of the same. And I really want to see kids break out of that. And equally, we have very high-achieving, highly successful people in our society who, on the inside, are miserable. We look at Kate Spade or Anthony Bourdain, some very smart, talented people who achieved a lot and then died by suicide. So, what is appears to be success on the outside, I think, is something very different than what being successful on the inside is. And being successful on the inside is being your own friend, taking care of yourself, learning how to listen to what you need and giving yourself that, not beating up on yourself. I think some people feel that they sound soft and that the way they motivate themselves is, criticism, but there's another way, and I really want kids to hear and learn about that. I think we haven't done a good enough job. Me as a parent, I didn't do a good enough job And I think our society as a whole, we're very much a winner-take-all society, and things feel very tough and competitive. And I want to offer kids that different perspective, that it's okay to nurture yourselves and recognize your vulnerabilities and mistakes, and it actually can be a path to greater strength.
Wow. Yes, there is a whole nother way of seeing and responding to yourself and your thoughts and your feelings. I want to say this, that this I just feel like this is relevant. When you say, some people say, well, that's how I motivate myself, I'm hard on myself. And I want to validate that as Tony Robbins says, dissatisfaction is a gem. And when you're not satisfied with something, it is very motivating. So that, you can use it to take action, to motivate you to take action, to do something. And I have a practice that I do. I call it hard work and accomplishment. Someone taught me one time that hard work and accomplishment creates a sense of self-respect and self-esteem, and that just by working hard at things and accomplishing things, I can look back at what I've accomplished and I can actually feel kind of a little bit better about myself. And I find that really helpful.
For sure.
And I don't want to. I want to separate that from what you're talking about, because I want to validate it and also separate it from what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think the distinction is that it's fine to say, like, wow, I really wish I had done better, or gosh, like, I can only do 1 push-up. The average person my age can do 15 push-ups. I really have a big deficit there. Versus, oh, look at you. You're always the worst. You never get any better. To just, to bring that objectivity that we talked about, as opposed to, it's fine to want to do better, to set goals, to recognize, like, well, the reason I did bad on that test is that I didn't study enough, or the reason I got fired from my job is that I was late. I need to do something about that. It's not about denying the reality, but it's about taking away that that piece that is, I fail because I'm a bad person. I fail because I don't deserve a good job. I fail because, all of those negative self-judgments. So it's really about being more honest and objective, looping back to what we were talking about earlier about, taking out the judgment loop.
Right, taking out the judgment loop. And so I want to share this example, not to make this podcast about me or my story, but just it's such a relevant example of what we're talking about. So a number of years ago, I was in a very dark place, and I was caught in that judgment loop where I was telling myself that I just wasn't good enough, that I was a failure, I was a loser, I wasn't good enough, I couldn't keep up. And it was destroying me. And when I was introduced to this mindfulness concept of making observations without evaluating them, without judging, and starting to notice, like you said, your needs that you have, and when you can identify what those needs are, then you can actually be responsible for them and find ways of meeting them. And so what I realized years ago when I was in this dark place was that one of my needs that was lacking was purpose. I did not have any purpose. I just didn't know what to do with myself. And as a man, not knowing what to do with himself, not knowing what his purpose is, it was like a really hard thing to face day after day. It was really eating me up and destroying me. And so I had been in that feedback cycle of telling myself, well, you're just not good enough. You don't have the potential. You'll never make anything of yourself. And I was in my head evaluating and passing all these judgments. But when I noticed, hey, my need is for purpose. I need to belong somewhere, doing something with my life that I feel like I like a good fit, and I'm making a contribution to the world. Then I started to ask myself, well, what can I do to bring that purpose into my life? What can I do with my life so that my need for purpose will be met? And opportunities opened up left and right. I could see all sorts of opportunities. And now I was in a completely different place. Whereas before I was just beating myself up, calling myself a loser. Now all of a sudden I was looking at all these different possibilities and options. and it really kind of changed the direction of my life when I got out of that cycle of judgment, that feedback loop of judgment, and started to notice what was actually going on. So thank you so much for your work, Cynthia, bringing this sort of, I remember at that time, too, I was in my 30s, and I was telling myself, I wish someone had taught me this when I was a lot younger. And so when I saw the Benji Project and what you were doing, sharing this stuff with youth, I knew it was, like, immediately very, very interesting to me. Immediately I was like, I want to do everything I can to support this organization and get the word out about it, and help get this useful information to the youth, people who need it,
Yeah,
sooner
thank
than
you
later.
so much. I
Sooner than
really
later.
appreciate it. Yeah, we've had some really great support. The Rotary, Kiwanis have given us some great funding. We've got a camp for 11 to 14-year-olds coming up this upcoming week. We've got a new program for kids who've just graduated from high school and might be heading to college or into the workforce, training for them. We do 8-week classes for either middle schoolers or high schoolers. We'd love to have, I think there's a lot of people in the community who still don't know us. We're a pretty young organization, and so anything we can do to spread the word and get more kids hooked up with the classes is really helpful, and I really appreciate the opportunity.
Well, so the call is now getting up near an hour long, and I don't want to take up too much of your time. There are 2 points I'd like to hit on before we finish up, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Number one is that in your first call, your first podcast that I heard online, you asked the question, how can we make it easier for teens to talk about their struggles, and that struggling is normal, and just getting to that point where we can sort of open up and be seen as human and receive acceptance as we are. How can we help kids feel more comfortable being vulnerable, sharing what their experience is really like, what their struggles are really like. And I think that's a really important question that I wanted to just touch on before we end the call. And
sure,
is that
yeah.
something that the Benji Project's trying to do, is make it easier for kids to talk about their struggles and to be seen as they truly are?
Absolutely, yeah. Part of what I learned, or what I came to believe about Benji's experience, was that he did not feel that that his peers or society, or maybe even his parents, I don't know, I hope not, but that we would not accept him for who he really was, that he wasn't lovable as himself. And let me just bracket it to say he was an incredibly lovable person. He was, all people are lovable, but he, as his mom, I can say he was a really special person, so lovable. And so he was unable to open up about what was truly going on for him, the struggles he was having, because he didn't feel that it was safe to be vulnerable and to share that, part that felt inadequate.
Right.
So
and
it's really
therein lies therein lies our struggle right there.
So it's so important that kids know that they don't have to do anything to be worthy of our time, attention, and love. And parenting experts have been saying that forever, but the way for me that manifests in the Benji Project is for trying to help kids see that we all are struggling with something. Everyone has something that they're not proud of, faults, whatever it might be, and that's normal. Perfection is not normal. I don't know where we got the idea that we're supposed to be perfect anyway. So if we can normalize that, maybe it opens the door for conversations. And in our classes, we're not trying to get kids to open up and talk and share their problems. It's more that inner peace with them coming to accept that they're good just the way they are, that they're deserving, that they're great people, that they're not failures or inadequate because they've got something in their home life, or that they're not great at something, or that they're not the popular one. They need to get that message, and I hope our classes help achieve that. But it's something that we all need to contribute to, and it's a problem bigger than one community. But I hope we can all do our part.
Thank you, Cynthia. I really do. I really hope we can all do our part to help the youth and all of us learn that it's okay to reveal our the parts of us that we're afraid for other people to see. It's okay to reveal it to certain people at certain times, and to receive love, and to be seen for who we really are, to be accepted as we are. Thank you so much for bringing this to the youth, for everything you're doing, and I would like to be supportive in any way I possibly can. Do you have any requests for the community? Is there anything that we can do to help support the Benji project, to help it be successful in sharing these important lessons with youth? Is there anything we can do to help?
Yeah, there are a few things. Of course, we always need money, so financial contributions are welcome. But the bigger challenge we have right now is that breaking through to kids, and even taking a class like this seems to represent for many kids a sign, a stigma, like, you only need a class like this if you're a failure. And I want to make clear that smart, successful people need these skills. We all can be happier and healthier and cope better in our life, and we're all entitled to the maximum happiness we can achieve. So, smart people take advantage of every opportunity to learn skills that help them be happier and healthier. And I hope that your listeners and our community can share that message with kids, that, learning these skills isn't a sign of weakness or failure or inadequacy. It's a sign of strength, and a sign of purpose, and a sign that they're taking an honest look at where the world is and finding their place in it as fully grown human beings.
Great. Thank you. Man, this is so inspiring. I mean, I hope I can make more contributions to your project and what you're doing, your organization. I see a whole marketing campaign of something like I struggle too. Or something along those lines, where kids and people can kind of take a little bit of pride in being able to reveal that openly, because it takes bravery to do it. It takes a little bit of bravery to do it, to say, sure, I struggle too, and it would be a neat marketing campaign. Something along those lines. But so if anybody would like more information on the Benji project, or they're excited to get their child signed up for a workshop or a class, I guess they head over to your website, right? What would that be?
It's www.thebenji, which is spelled BENJI, project, PROJECT.org. So www.thebenjiproject.org.
Okay, thebenjiproject.org. Great. And do you have any other pieces of ways that you'd like people to contact you or follow you, or do you want them to just go to your website? Should they like your Facebook page, anything like that?
Yeah, we'd love to have some more followers on our Facebook page. Please like it, and anyone wants to send a message or has any individual comment or feedback, there's a contact form on our website, and those emails come directly to me. So, and I'm really good about responding to them. I would love to have more dialogue in our community about this, or talk to people who are interested in getting involved in this work.
So lastly, do you have any events coming up locally that anyone might want to attend?
We have
like a community discussion, or just anything at all?
When do you think this will air?
I'd like to get it up within a week. The one that we're recording right now.
Yeah, we have a couple events this week, but we don't have anything on the calendar immediately thereafter. One of our main focuses coming up is working on programs within the school, both the middle school and high school. We're exploring that right now.
Exciting.
And yeah, we'll have more opportunities coming up, but nothing on the calendar.
Okay, so we should keep our eye on the benjiproject.org and see what's going on, what events are coming up, what's on the calendar. Thank you so much, Cynthia.
Thank you. I was just going to say that on our homepage there's a place to sign up for our newsletter, so if you want to get any, anytime we have programs, we send out an email update, and if you sign up there, you'll be on the list for it.
Okay, great. Will do.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cynthia Osterman, so much for your time. Thank you for everything you're doing. Thank you for your time on the phone today. Thank you for your friendship.
Thank you. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Okay. Have yourself a great weekend. I'll see you around.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the West Puget Community Connection podcast. Be sure to catch the next episode. Sign up for our email list at westpugetcommunityconnection.com, and you'll be notified when new episodes are published. And if you're interested in advertising or being featured on the show, you can contact us through our website as well, westpugetcommunityconnection.com. The West Puget Community Connection podcast is brought to you in part by mywebdesignservices.com. Quick, easy, affordable websites that look amazing across all devices. For a quote or to get started today, visit mywebdesignservices.com. The West Puget Community Connection podcast. This is where we learn about the people of our community. We learn what they do, and more importantly, why they do it. Subscribe by email at westpugetcommunityconnection.com. We look forward to learning more about you.